So today I would like to discuss a quite thorny topic, and especially to answer the question: is university really necessary to have a good knowledge of history, or if by yourself you can learn history from other life paths and essentially and especially on your own. Um, I guess that this depends a lot on which kind of knowledge of history you want to get. But it's not so simple like saying, if you go to university you have a greater knowledge of history than someone who reads history books for all his life. The problem is also that universities, um, even in the same Western world, are quite different one from the others. There are countries where you can learn better, other countries that have other goals in university teaching. Um, so it really depends on many aspects, and ultimately, obviously, it depends on every person that and its choices. Um, I won't talk by my experience in this sense. I won't discuss the balance, the results of my own experience. But I would like just to point out what is really the difference of learning history at university compared to learning it from somewhere else. Now, I guess that the greatest problems in answering this question, and the real matter that actually pushed me and other people to discuss this topic, is that when you finish university, you get a degree. So you get a paper on which it's written that you are a certified historian, and this degree obviously is valid, in other countries, and there is a general um, um, consensus that you that you that you are a historian in a factual and objective way. Now, from my perspective, when I got a degree in history, a 5 years degree, and I'm also keeping it on because I am in my PhD now. I didn't feel at all like I was a historian. For some of you who have read, something I wrote, or heard one of my videos, um, already know that I think that being an historian is something that goes really beyond, um, you know, having a piece of paper that tells that you are so. Being a historian means that you are into a research, that you are a researcher, as a matter of fact. What happens when you go to university is that you basically get a structural education similar to the one you get in school, methodically speaking, and in fact you especially get a method. You get a practice into research. You're taught how to deal with sources and historiographical problems and so on. The point though, and this is the impression I got, not just from my experience, but from basically every historian that I've met in my life, even from other countries, is that the amount of um, of informations that you get at university is actually pretty low. You if you go to university, most of the times um, y- it's spent, and most of the times it's spent learning, I don't know, for several months, those 300, 600 pages that you get for every exam. In my country especially, we study really a lot, and we get even many exams. I discovered that in other countries it's not the same way, and in fact the results are pretty evident in this sense. Um, and therefore, even if in perspective you may learn a lot by getting to university, at the same time you spend repeating over and over again those pages that um, you have to be examined on eventually, um, is a time in which you could learn much more. mm, You could read not those 3 or 4 books that you have for the exam, but you can read even 30 books, right? Or maybe, well, not maybe 10 times more, but let's say double time, triple time, the same quantity of books. And there is a great difference, though, that what you study by repeating is really studying. When you read a book for your own pleasure, even with the aim of learning, um, the consequence is that you tend to forget more, that you retain much less of the informations that are contained in that book. So in other words, what you study at university is something that is meant, let's say, to remain. And that's what it's given a structure, because you're meant to arrive at university that you don't know what a historian does in practical terms, getting a structure, and then filling it up, um, with your own knowledge for the rest of your life. And that is up to you. And this is crucial, this last point, for the simple reason that I see many colleagues, let's say, that I can hardly define, so, that got that degree and they stopped learning about history. Sure, maybe they read articles on the internet and get more or less interested in history in some ways, but let's say that for them, education proper stopped in the moment in which they got the degree. And in this sense, they are idling to that. That they haven't gone forward. They haven't really achieved anything else, but having studied some couple of tens or even maybe 100 books in their university life, and that's pretty much it. And maybe they search for a job that has nothing to do with history, and obviously I can't blame it. I can blame them for doing such a thing. But close to that job, they don't have anything else in historical terms. Um, so technically, there are people who studied history much more than people who went to university, especially people who have a lifetime, let's say, interest towards history, and that read book after book. Yet, I must say that university does leave a mark. University does not create um, quantity of knowledge, but as I said before, it produces structure and method. And I've found actually that maybe even old people who had obviously read much more than me and who seemingly had a very good personal culture, not just in history, in many other things, because I believe that studying history without, I don't know, studying languages or literature or philosophy or history of technology or science, I mean, it's or economics is it's pretty stupid. History is actually filled with all those subjects after all. So what struck me, um, to be honest, is that these very cultured people who had read for their lives still made huge mistakes in historical perspective. Like, yeah, they had read, all the major historiographical authors. They had a huge, extensive knowledge of historical events, of I don't know, history of art, and many other stuff. But they still got the the main the main historical problems in the wrong way. Maybe in an older historiographical fashion, or having a very superficial understanding of certain phenomena. And therefore, I understood that at least in those cases, obviously there were people who instead got everything right, let's say, and and even without a degree in history, were better than maybe than some university professors. But it's extremely rare, and it's not something you can achieve if you haven't had a certain type of education. In those cases, specifically, there were other professionals, such as, I don't know, engineers or economists or politologists, who seemed to have a much deeper historical understanding and competence than certain proper history professors. Um, and in those cases, I understood that the reason of this achievement was that they still had a university education. So maybe not learning history at university, but they still got a good method, a good structure. They were intelligent people, and therefore, by reading and making researches on their own, they achieved brilliant results, even, you know, going beyond the average competence of a certified historian. And I think that this is quite, I learned a lot from this because I realized that um, certain ideas that we have in the world today, that is having a sort of shared knowledge that everybody can get, and feeling, you know, that our conscience is alright with that, is really wrong, because in order to have people who really reason well, and that they are competent in their own field, it doesn't take 3 years or 5 years of university to be, to achieve this result. Most of the times, I'm saying in Western world, with, meaning that not that there is a world that is better than it elsewhere, but in the Western world, that it is indeed the best world in terms of education and learning. Our degrees rarely, really rarely produce real intelligent people or real competent people, and obviously there is a limit to the amount of resources that we can dedicate to education. I'm not really blaming the single individuals because they didn't choose to study their own life. But I'm just saying that when we get into subjects like history that are extremely complex and complicated, um, you know, there is a huge difference between someone who just stops to the degree and someone who goes much beyond. um, and therefore certain levels of ability tend to form. It's also true that history is an extremely vast subject, so there is also a kind of degree of personalization of your knowledge. You It's possible that every historian as well as any person has an amount of knowledge, a certain amount of knowledge that no one else in the world has. So in this sense, philosophically speaking, we all have to learn from one another. But in more practical terms, it's evident that learning history well in general and being able to have satisfactory, or at least you know rational and logical mm, criteria of critics, um, it's something that requires much more than a university path to be accomplished. And it's also true, sadly, that most of the people, like 99% of the people who haven't gone to university to study history, will most likely have something that doesn't work, in their understanding of history. Something that doesn't work means not that they're not perfect, because perfection does not exist in any historian, of course, as well as in any person. But what I'm saying is that something that doesn't work is something too serious and something too, let's say, that has too many negative consequences when trying to understand history, at least at the levels that our historiographies have reached. I will come back discussing this topic, and probably I didn't really say everything I wanted to say about this topic because it's really vast and complicated. But I will make more videos on how you know, to learn, and also obviously about the problems that in today's world, uh, mm, through the internet, for instance, we have at learning history. So thank you for listening.